welcome back to the No Matter What Club podcast. Sometimes I want to say No Matter What Recovery, but this is the No Matter What Club podcast. And joining us today, we have, as you know, Paulo here in the center. And then on either side of us, we have Daniel to my left over here and Kylon over here to my right. So, Paulo, the reason why I brought you all here today is because there is a very special bond and connection between the three of you. Paulo, can you just start us off and tell us how you know Daniel and Kylon?
For sure. So when I was displaced in Chicago after Hurricane Katrina, I was at the very end of my using. I was 17 and I didn't have any friends there. I didn't know how to do anything. I used very popular, I was going to say social media apps, but this was pre-social media. This is 2006. And so it was online methods of communication and getting high and having sex and all of that. And I got really, really sick.
What was happening during this time to you?
So in this time, I moved to Chicago and I was very lost. I was at the end of my using and I got super sick and I was hospitalized because of my addiction and an HIV status that I didn't know about. And I was in the hospital at the Illinois Masonic Hospital in Chicago. And someone who professionally was my nurse practitioner, and I was her very first patient ever in life. Her name was Kristen Keglovitz.
Yes.
And she looked at me and she was like, Paulo, tonight's the night you can live or you can die. You need to make your choice. And I was in the hospital for about 2 weeks. I hadn't talked to my parents. My viral load was over 1 million. I had 14 T cells, and she looked at me and she hooked me up with case management at Howard Brown at the youth center, and I got all these different services, and they referred me to Crystal Meth Anonymous, and I walked into the Friday night meeting of CMA and I met you two. And it was CMA had just started in Chicago, so there was it was a very small community, and you two kind of just took me under your wing and helped really shape the man that I am today in very early sobriety.
And so, Kylon or Daniel, chime in here. Where were you all at in your own individual recovery stories in this moment?
In 06?
Yeah.
06 was, for me and Kylon, it was our 1+ year of sobriety. So we were very much zygotes of CMA. We had baby teaspoons of sobriety, in my opinion. Still kind of trying to get at least I was trying to gain my sea legs, I was, a year before it was my time, where it was just kind of getting that unstuckness to my life. And so at that time I was kind of crafting whether I'm going to stay in retail, which was the only job I could really have.
This was before hair school.
Before hair school, because I was convicted. I had 3 felonies over my head, which were eventually 2 of them were actually convictions. So I could only be a hairdresser. I wasn't going to be allowed to be around children. I could not I couldn't get a medical certificate because in Illinois at that time, felons were very restricted to the type of work they could have. So it was, it was kind of an exciting but very transitional time of recovery for me.
And where were you at?
Yeah, so similarly, right? 06 was just after that first year of recovery. And, we talk about not making any major changes in that first year. And so much like Daniel, I was getting my sea legs. I didn't know what I wanted to be if I grew up. I'm still stuck there, right? If I grow up. So that was a really interesting time. And to have new folks like Paulo coming into the room, and us being at that time old timers
right.
with 1 year,
That's
right, in that fellowship felt really surreal. And feeling I remember that feeling of I don't have much to offer here, but I got to offer something, right? Recognizing and remembering that, and you talked about this, Paulo, that sense of desperation, right before coming in, like remembering that feeling and holding it so close was like, okay, I got to show up for other people, even though I feel like I don't know what I'm doing here. And so that was really powerful for me. I hadn't found a career yet. I was bouncing around in different settings, retail, customer service. I hadn't yet gone back to school, right? Again, thinking about that sense of, I don't know what I'm really doing, but like I got to show up for other people, which in a lot of ways meant I needed to show up for self. And so that was a really big part of my recovery in 06, 07, I think those earlier years.
Formative years.
Yeah, formative.
I'll never forget that feeling of me walking. I had to walk 2 blocks to the Howard Brown Health Center where that Friday meeting used to be in Chicago, and my old place on Buena. And I'll never forget the feeling. I had so much anxiety because I didn't know what I was walking into. I just had a feeling that it was a room full of gay men. And I didn't know how to have relationships with gay men other than transactional relationships through using and, you know, other methods of communication. And I'll never forget like walking in there and just everybody like gave you a hug and said, welcome home. You know, it's that feeling of like, you know, just like uncertainty and like ready to change, but like scared, you know, that fear of like, am I ready to admit that I'm a drug addict and that my life has become unmanageable?
Yeah, and I love that you talk about it, sort of like that early sense of walking into a room and not knowing how to interact with other gay men, other queer folks in a space that wasn't in a transactional way, that wasn't based in either sex, right, or trade, or whatever that looked like, is really powerful. Like I think oftentimes, and I sit back and I watch it today, right, with some years of recovery under my belt, I sit back and watch it today, new folks coming in with this sense of like, who am I and how do I interact? How do I relationship build? Right? Without this transactional foundation that I'm so accustomed to.
I oftentimes wonder if it walks people out the door.
Yeah.
The fear of like connection and love and all of that. Like it's the fear.
Yeah, I would totally agree with that, Paulo. In fact, you know, I work in an adjacent program in SLAA, and we often talk about
what is
like
SLAA for the
I'm sorry for all you that are listening for in the recovery world. SLAA is Sex and Love Addicts Anonymous, and it really like focuses on the fact that a lot of people, in general, but a lot of, especially queer people and especially crystal meth addicts, have what's called an intimacy disorder.
Yeah.
You know, disordered intimacy. It really, like if I overhaul and audit like my using, but even before my using, like what I wanted, what I really strive for that I just couldn't find on my own, that I saw other people have, was this sense of connection, you know, and the sense of, you know, of identity and of forming healthy intimacy with other people. And for me to even do that with people was a difficult challenge, let alone to try and do it with other, you know, gay men.
Yeah.
And this, the disorder stems from, what are your thoughts on where this stems
I mean, I think for me, definitely there was some abandonment issues environmentally. And then also I was just a tough, like little scared, anxious child. And so I think, you know, biochemically, I had some things that were that predisposed me to becoming the great crystal meth addict that I was. But definitely, I think there were a lot of environmental factors that led to it.
And I was just going to say that, Daniel, I love that you talk about sort of like the biochemical foundation, which is so important to acknowledge and recognize, and that there are some external factors at play that are outside of our control, but that we learn to internalize when we're really young. We learn to internalize this projection or this communication, especially, I think, as gay men, especially as gay men who, right, have started to express that internalization through use, which is like, I'm not good enough. I'm not smart enough, right? I'm not worthy of love. And so hearing those messages that are environmental, right, they're coming externally into my body, and then I start to internalize those things, which raises my level of anxiety, right?
And also, I think it's part of gay culture. You know, if like, am I masculine enough to be in this room? Am I, am I coming across too effeminate to not be considered worthy of acceptance or somebody finding me attractive? And then the internalized shame of hating yourself because you're not meeting the gay standard of what.
Yes.
Like, I don't know if I've watched enough Liza Minnelli, or, I don't know if I have, just there's all these entry and access points in queer, into the queer spaces.
Totally.
That I think in those times, in like the '05 and like the early 2000s, might be different than what it is today. I'm sure there's a lot of commonality but I always felt like I had this terminally unique position that nobody else had, and that my point of access was so much more difficult than anybody else.
I also think too that for some of us, not all of us, and when I say us, I mean just the community as a whole. For example, I was raised with two very loving parents who loved each other. They were together for 50 plus years. So I have that as a model, but I never had what the model was like for two men.
Yes.
Right. And so I had to learn that on my own, really, because when I was a kid, the only gay people that were public were the ones that were made fun of.
Yeah.
The celebrities that were made fun of or people poked fun of. And so that was to your point, like, that's where I learned, like, oh, you know what? People make fun of people like me.
Yes.
And then it kind of erodes your self-esteem a little bit away.
And it's so interesting that you say that, because I feel like we were starting to make progress in a time where, Ryan Murphy did a great job of like Pose, right? For me, it really, I'm alive because of a trans woman that like took me in, and seeing that show really made me respect and understand the culture of the people that came before me as a gay community. And so we started seeing some things in the media that a generation was able to see. And then now if we look at what's in the media, it's we're kind of back to where we were, what you were just talking about, like being made fun of, but now it's more fear-based than like humor-based, right? It's like, watching any sort of, and I don't want to get too political, but like watching any sort of like news media thing right now, like our community is in fear. Like we are all in fear, especially trans folks. It's like it's so crazy.
Yeah, and I think we have to talk about that, right? We have to talk about that, and we need to talk about the scope and the breadth, right? Like this disease, right? My disease of addiction doesn't discriminate, and that means that like trans folks are eligible too, and women are eligible too. And we started off this conversation talking about sort of what those rooms were like in Chicago in those early days. But what oftentimes gets missed is that we had a strong contingency of women that set the foundation for this program, specifically in Chicago. So I'm sure probably nationally, but specifically in Chicago, who brought us in, right? Who saw us struggling. I know my story. There was a woman that I had only known through partying and drinking and drugging. And when I was experiencing homelessness, she saw me on the street and she brought me to my first like sober experience. And so we need to be talking about, much to your point, Paulo, when we talk about what is the fear, we also need to be talking about how we address those fears. And much of that is through community and collaboration.
I love that. I think that, for me, when I got sober in early sobriety, the community piece, like I didn't dive into the book. I didn't do this. Like for me, today I've done all the steps, I've done the work. But like for me, it was a social thing at first. And that's what kept me coming back, because I was getting, I was able to build community. And they say in the rooms, that connection is help me out here. What is that?
The opposite of addiction. The opposite of addiction
is connection, and it really is. It's like the bumper sticker slogan of wanting to be able to build that community piece. And
yeah, I mean, I think community is something that I I seek from the rooms now. It wasn't, but I don't know that it was, when I first got to CMA in '05, I was there because I had to somebody made a decision for me. 'Cause I had to be extricated from my situation.
Wow.
Yeah, because I just couldn't stop using on my own. And so I had kind of a similar, a mini intervention of what you see on TV, but it was not as, I got the letters and the stuff like that. And, it was a little bit of the drama, but the main thing is you can choose to have this life, or you can choose to, try something different. And the only reason I wanted to try something different was because I was completely psychotic. I could not decipher, if the wall was black or if it was really white. It was so difficult for me to really understand what was happening in my own reality. But to the point of what did I seek then and what do I seek now? Community is what I seek now, but I also seek sobriety, right? I'm also seeking that same thing that I came in for at the beginning, which was I want to figure out how to live my life without the need or the use of crystal meth. Because before I was using crystal meth to wake up, to go to sleep, to go to the bathroom, everything that I did operationally happened with crystal meth. And I just wanted a little bit of respite. And that's why I came into CMA. That was the original reason. And Kylon knows, I came to those rooms and I didn't say a thing for 2 years. I could not cry. I could not laugh. I had a flat affect.
You were dry as a napkin, bitch.
It was dry as a
2.5 years. It was 2.5 years of that
laid
behavior.
down like a rug, honey.
It's 2.5 years.
2.5 years, yeah. So it was a as somebody says in Chicago, a slow, painful recovery process for myself.
I remember the night you decided to go to hair school. We were at fellowship, and you were dating a hairstylist at the time. And you just were. We were at dinner, and you were like, "Yeah, I think I'm gonna go to hair school." That was it's just so funny.
Is there a story here? Sorry to interrupt you. Is there a story with the hairstylist?
I think it's just a commonality that we just all know who the hairstylist is. So there's always this response, and also look at her now. She's an international award winning, right? When we think about the places that our sobriety takes us, stylist. But I love that you remember that.
I can't remember the name of the restaurant. It was it was across the street from that place that you worked at. The gay clothing store that you worked at.
Universal Queer.
Universal Gear. So it was cat a corner, and it was this little diner.
Not why. Oh, it's
Stella's. Yes. Yes.
Would have been
and we were
Stella's.
all there, and you were like, "Yeah, I think I'm going to go to hair school." And it's funny because at that time I'm like, "Fuck, I have a 9th grade education. I can't even think about where I'm going." That's when I was working at the beauty counter as a spritzer.
But a good spritzer.
I remember those days.
And that's the thing. It's we do what we do and we do it well.
Wow.
I went from, selling drugs and selling cosmetics is very similar. You throw in a gift with purchase and suddenly you have a clientele, and
transferable skills.
Totally. It was something that I ended up being really good at. And I did it for many, many years. And it's funny because a majority of the things that I do in my role at No Matter What Recovery, I learned in the beauty industry, which is wild.
Yeah. A lot of things that I've learned also in the beauty industry, I can apply some of those things, or I apply those things into what I do now as a hairdresser from recovery, right? The ability to really
Show up.
Yeah, to show up and but to speak to a client, but to see a client, not just see your hair, but see who you are, who is your lifestyle, who is your personality. Those are things that I see colleagues struggle with all the time. And I'm just it's kind of second nature. But I had to figure out how to look into people and hold the hand of somebody because somebody was holding my hand, and that was really what I needed, and you talked about, those men who were not, who there was no transaction for you to get sober, and that I was so lucky, that when I got sober, the people that were there really wanted us to be sober. Yeah. They didn't want anything else from us, and so Yeah, I mean the hairdressing thing, it's been a wild ride. Like I didn't expect to be, the accolades and all that kind of stuff, and that's cool stuff. It's fun, but at the end of the day, like the most important thing, the most incredible thing that I feel remarkable about in my life is my sobriety from crystal meth.
Mm-hmm.
It really is.
Yeah, I love though that we can talk about that, right? Like, what are transferable skills, right? What are things that like recovery we get to live in, right? I've heard said, in spaces that we're not a dumb lot, we're not a glum lot, we're not. We're also not a dumb lot, right? We're also some of the most intelligent folks that I know, and can take those skills and really reapply them across the board, right? To refocus when we're not focused on, getting drunk or high, right?
I feel like those, for me, the skills that I have today, yes, I've learned them and through the various roles I've had in my career, but also too, it's my inner nature too that's shining a little bit brighter today because I don't have the cloud of drugs or alcohol, and so it's just presenting itself in a little bit stronger of a way because I'm present. And I'm here.
Yeah, I love that, Tony. Thank you. Yeah.
And so I guess the reason why I mentioned that is because, as you are in the service industry and we are in the service industry, but you have, dedicated a lot of your professional career to that as well, right? To helping others.
Yeah, in various ways and places in which I didn't think I would ever go, right? And so I started, you talked about sort of Howard Brown, and shout out to like the health and clinical setting, which is where I started at that youth center professionally in recovery. I was about 5 years in recovery, and I thought, how can I expand and give back and be of service in a way that is ongoing and really proliferates. And that was like contributing to youth communities, some of whom are struggling with addiction, right? And battling that. And that sort of over the course of time has morphed into expanding my impact and influence. And so in a role now that I work across our state, and really supporting what it looks like to address various needs across unhoused populations. And again, one of the needs that we see in unhoused populations is substance use, substance abuse, and really addressing those things. Again, I didn't think that I would go there, right, in this life of recovery. But it really has, like you said, Tony, with those clouds being removed, expanded my ability to show up, be present, and impact a greater variety of folks, a wider population of folks, recognizing that when we do things like get the clouds out of the way, we have access to much more internal power. And I think that's so very necessary, especially in this day and age when we think about things that might be fear-based.
Right.
And how we want to move through those.
Well, you're somebody that I call for advice. I mean, something else that you've really done is just a lot of work within the DEI community. And, you're somebody that I look up to and call when we're, I specifically remember calling you a year or two ago and saying like, hey, how do I handle this?
Yeah. And I appreciate those moments, right, of being able to be present there. And again, like with the goal of expanding what has been so profound for me in getting those barriers out of the way, and tapping into more of that service. Like, how can I expand that reach? Is to be able to pass that on then to someone else, right? Who extends a hand and reaches out and says, hey, listen, I'm in this situation, and how can I navigate this in a way that is impactful and meaningful and provide support and care? And I love that about you, Paulo, because you do that so often so well.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So one of the reasons, Paulo, why we had invited, well, a couple of reasons why Kylon and Daniel are here today is one, there's a recovery convention happening this weekend, and they're in town from Chicago. But you have a very special bond with Chicago as well as LA because you got sober in both places. And anyways, do you want to kind of touch on that for a second?
Yeah. So I've been sober in Chicago and I've been high in Chicago. It's funny. I remember I was under the influence of something, and I was in New Orleans, and you know how like you go from you're going down Bourbon Street in St. Anne, and then you go through Jackson Square, and there's all those little people with the tables that are like reading fortunes. One of the things that she told me was that I always need to live near a body of water. And I don't know why that has always stuck in my head, but like in Chicago and Los Angeles, I've been able to thrive. In New Orleans, I've been able to thrive. And those are the three cities. I was in Atlanta, and it was like the worst experience of my life for me. And I really feel like this lady at this table in Jackson Square, like put the juju on me or something. And I was like, girl, I cannot be in a landlocked city. Like I have to be near a city with water. And for whatever reason, Chicago for me, whenever we go visit, and we go visit you guys or y'all come here, it's a city that like I can walk down the street and I feel alive. I feel alive in Chicago for whatever reason. It's just the cleanliness. It's the spirit of the city. It's all of it. And I was in some of the darkest times in my life in Chicago, and I've also been in some of the brightest times in my life in Chicago. And the friendship circle that we've built there has just been absolutely beautiful. And it's funny because one of the things that I love about recovery, not just CMA specifically, but all the A's, is you can go into a meeting anywhere in the country and, not know anybody and suddenly walk out with 50 friends. It's the magic of the anonymous programs,
Well, and I especially think it's true in Chicago, and this is why I wanted to ask you and Daniel, what is it about the Chicago recovery community that makes it so special? Because there is definitely an attraction there. I know that Paulo and I feel it. And it's, yes, you all are our friends, but there's something special there in Chicago. What is it?
It's the bread.
I mean, yes, girls like to eat. That's a real.
I guess for those who can eat bread.
Fair enough.
I did see you have a bite of cake last night.
One of the things that
It's not bread.
Yeah,
They're not the same.
Not the same.
Thanks for clarification.
Wait, hold on.
That's another podcast topic.
Literally.
Yeah, no, I get it. I think one of the things about Chicago specifically is, much like Paulo said, is that like when you use there, you use like I use hard. And it is something that not just the use, but I think the pacing of the city can brought me to my knees. And so to experience recovery in that setting was like, and I know in early days, and that was some time ago, like 2005, we held on to each other like life rafts.
Yeah.
Like those were our saving graces. And we had to invest in each other in a way that was saving our own lives and like the lives of those around us so closely. And I think that type of bond gets, it's something that solidifies in those rooms, and then it just gets expanded and expounded upon. New waves of folks come in and they see that. I will tell you, that's one of the first things that a newcomer will say is, it feels cliquey in here. And they might experience that with a negative connotation of like, this feels like a clique, not having seen yet the bond that had to be formed in order for those folks to connect, and that we're welcoming you into that bond, and we need you to stay. And so the more that we see people come back and stay, the more we see shifts in that understanding of, oh, this was about saving lives. And right, that's why it felt cliquey, is because we're holding on to each other. Well, let us expand this hold. And I think maybe that's some of the things that Paulo is talking about, is tapping into that expansion, is like, wow, I felt welcome. I wanted to continue to feel welcomed, right? And then how do we extend that to more folks?
We were really inseparable. I mean, honestly, like we were in meetings together. I remember the first time I was on a box in sobriety.
Yeah, that's right, because we clubbed together.
We went to the clubs together.
Right.
We went to the dinners together. We went to the movies. It was like we were just.
But that's what we did, and I think that's to what you guys are talking about. Like we were forced into. There were no apps.
No.
There were no, ways of the art of distraction came from connecting with other people, doing things that we may have done as crystal meth addicts. I mean, if I could make it out of the house to get to a club, but as a sober person, like I was told, like not a lot has to change. Like, and so like we were talking earlier, we went to the bathhouse together.
Yep.
We went to the clubs together. We would call our sponsor before we would go in and when we would leave.
Yep.
Just to, keep that check-in going. I was going to say, like, the other thing about Chicago is, like, we go through seasons. Like, we have real seasons that happen. It gets real cold. But the cool thing about when it does get real cold is that the warmest things happen in the city. We have so much active culture and performance art and things that, maybe we didn't see as crystal meth addicts, but it is there and it is thriving. And I think that's something that our city has a unique capability of doing for people during the times where it feels gray and dull and just, mundane. And that's one of the most special things I think that exists about Chicago today, at least for me. As a sober person, I get to experience all of that because as a crystal meth addict, I didn't know when the seasons were changing. I didn't know when it was snowing. I didn't know when it was negative 40 out. I knew that I was consistently high and maintained. And that is such a different place and it's such a different way to experience life. And, maybe that could be why you're drawn to the city a little bit more.
The only reason I knew it was Christmas one time was because I walked outside and there were decorations on the light post. I had no idea it was December.
Yeah,
that's right.
It was like, but the winter is also the prime time to be stuck in that cycle of addiction too. Because I know that like you don't get out of the house and you literally just get stuck in this like, for me, the deepest, darkest time of my using in Chicago was during the coldest months.
Absolutely.
Do y'all hear that?
Yeah, and that just happens over and over again. And I think, when we're stuck in that space of not being outside, of not getting outside, I mean, not just the apartment, but outside of self, right? Because I want to be alone with my drugs and my use, right? The opposite of that, and you talked about this earlier, Paulo, is the connection and the things that we get to do together. And some of that really required like stepping outside of maybe what was comfortable for me to connect with another human being, right? Who maybe at the outset, the only thing we had in common was that we didn't want to get high, but it allowed us to connect so much deeper and find out those other points of connection.
And we have such different backgrounds. Like I was just going to say, like where Kylon came from and where I came from, like in the beginning, couldn't be more different, like, and we talk about that, like how did we end up like best friends? Cause like, Kylon is chosen family for me. You both are chosen family. And it's just like the beginnings were so different, but the common, where we're at right now and where we're going is so unified.
Yeah.
And I think we were talking about this before the podcast started, right? You said, what is this loop factor? Like we know the Chicago loop, but like the Chicago loop of like being stuck in that place. And now also there's a loop factor of clarity and of sobriety and of not just sobriety, but it was something that I call like solid state sobriety, which solid state sobriety for me is that I'm not only in recovery, I'm not only willing to still go to any lengths for my recovery, I'm also actively working a step in my life by a sponsor, with a sponsee, and that I'm not only taking care of my spiritual health, but I'm also on top of my physical and mental health.
Yes.
Because I know that the rooms, at least for me, are only capable of helping that spiritual malady, and that the other things that I have to do that are adjacent to my sobriety are just are cornerstones to my health. Yeah.
I love that. Yeah, I was gonna say I regulate. I resonate with that so much because for me, I've learned through doing the work in the program that my addiction, which isn't unique in any way, is a mental, physical, and spiritual addiction. It's a 3-part disease. And, the 3 things that combat my mental, physical, and spiritual addiction is unity, service, and recovery. And I have a 3-part recovery where it's the triangle, where I address if I'm going to meetings but I'm not being of service, if I I'm working with a sponsee but I'm not picking up the phone to call my sponsor, then like my triangle isn't complete, and I'm probably a little crunchy, you know, or there's something off balance in my life, and so I know for me that perfect recipe, which has been laid out. It's a very one of the things I say in the rooms is that it's a very simple program for complicated people.
Totally.
We can complicate the shit out of a very simple equation. It's like when you're watching those drag race memes and you see all the little equations going off in the in the air. Maybe our editor can put the little equations on as I'm talking through this right now. But it's literally like, it's really simple. And for me, the three things are to operate from a place of authenticity, to be impeccable with my word, and surrender the outcome. And if I do those three things, that's the secret sauce for me.
Yeah, I love that. And bringing in that this programs exist as foundational pieces, and there's more, right, that may need to be addressed. My mental health needs to be addressed, and that has to live outside, right? My physical health needs to be addressed, and that has to live outside, but that those are the other pieces that I need present, right, in order to stay and to grow and have sort of, like Daniel talked about, like this solid recovery, right? Because that's the goal for me, is like solid recovery. Am I progressing? Am I learning? Am I, in some other spheres, they call it beginner's mind. Am I living in my beginner's mind? Am I always curious about what can be expanded, what I can learn that's new, what I can bring to others in the spirit of reciprocity, but like that beginner's mind that I feel is really powerful, and staying rooted.
I love that. I tend to look at that as the bird's eye view of things, right? And like being open-minded to the possibilities, but having that bird's eye view so you can assess what else? What else do I need to do? What else needs to be done here? Where can I pause to receive what else needs to be done here, and get that little clue.
One of the things that I love about my husband is he has mastered, well, I love it, and it aggravates me sometimes. He has mastered the art of pause. And as someone that doesn't think before they speak, or as someone that's an emotional kind of reactionary person, I mean, the longer time that I have sober, I tend to respond more than react, but my reactionary time is rather quick, and he has, he really is great at the art of pause. It's not something that I've completely mastered yet.
A lot of the times too, when I pause, the situation resolves itself and I don't have to do anything at all. It's like, great. Awesome.
That resonates with me so deeply because I experienced that, right? It's like inserting that pause. And like sometimes I share this with sponsees, like sometimes just like not doing anything can be the best response. That's self-resolution, right? And allowing time for things to resolve because they just might. And oftentimes they do.
Yeah.
Well, they have to.
So whether you're in the solid state, right? That's what you called it, the
Solid state.
solid
Right.
state, or the endless loop of recovery, sobriety. What is your no matter what in life? What's the one thing where you're like, not going to do that? Not gonna
I
go down
mean,
that
for
path.
me, it's very clear. I mean, no matter what, I'm not picking up drugs and alcohol. No
That
matter
part.
what happens in my life, because a lot has happened. So cool things, checks of like great things in my career have happened. There've been a lot of things in my life that have happened that have just somebody else have just they really suck. But the no matter what is that I don't pick up a drink or use.
That's right.
I can find other things to self-soothe with. Plenty of things to self-soothe with. I know that if I were to pick up crystal meth today, especially I saw in another episode, you said it's 10 times more powerful than it used to be.
I'm so glad fentanyl wasn't a thing when we were out there.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, we didn't get cut. Yeah. And if you got cut, it was, anyway.
You were shitting carpet fresh for a week.
Yeah.
I didn't know we could go there on the podcast, but okay. We called it the cheese. But yeah, no matter what, you don't pick up a drink or drug. I don't pick up a drink or a drug when I'm in a moment, you know? And I think that's, I have to be completely clear and simple-minded about it.
Yeah, and I have to echo that sentiment. And I think that's what sets us here with over 20 years of
That's so crazy.
sobriety, right? Is that the baseline has to be for me, the addict alcoholic that I am, has to be that I cannot put substance in my body. I cannot get drunk or high. Everything on top of that, there's a whole program, several programs to address what comes on top of that, in addition to that. But at the baseline foundational, I have to not be drunk or high. And I think, you know, through some processes in life, like I consider myself a harm reductionist, I truly believe in harm reduction.
I was actually going to get to that question in a second because
Yeah.
it's something that I really want to talk to you about. But
It's real. It's real. And here's what I found for myself as a person in recovery is that baseline of not putting a substance in my body is just the baseline, right? There are other activities and behaviors that I can participate in because I'm human and an addict, right? That aren't the best for me, but they're not getting drunk or high. So setting that as the foundation and using harm reduction techniques and tools in addition to has led to some successful, solid recovery for me. And so that is my no matter what.
the first thing I want to say is fuck 20 years. That
Yeah.
is crazy. Like,
Well, he has 20.
Ma'am.
I'm
You're at
still
19.
under.
Ma'am.
I'm at 19
you're
plus.
at 19.
Yeah.
So I mean, which is wild because I'll be
Yeah.
I'll be 40 this year, which means that you know, and I'll be 10 years sober this year. So
Yes.
it's, you know, but what's crazy is like you guys kind of, I mean, if we really think about it, you know, CMA had just started in Chicago in 2006, like maybe 2 years, a year. And, you know, it just the for paving the way and, you know, it's just like you guys have just been pillars in the Chicago sobriety scene, the Crystal Meth Anonymous scene for years. And so that's just amazing. You know, it really, really is.
And much like Daniel shared, sometimes it doesn't feel like sometimes it doesn't feel like, who is this person, right?
Yeah.
Like, did I do this?
Yeah.
Right. And the fact is, yes. And there will be moments. There have been moments when I was in school at one point. I was working full time. I was sleeping 4 hours a night, actually 4 hours a day, but that was 2 hours in the morning and 2 hours in the evening to get all of that in.
Done.
In recovery, in sobriety, and I would have feelings and sensations in my body like I was high. And I would call my sponsor and he would say, you know what, did you pick up a drink or a drug today? And I would say, no. He's like, then there's that 1 degree of difference.
Oh.
That 1 degree that leads to the further along the road that you get, it leads to a greater
Purpose.
distance, right? Between like your active using self and your recovering self. But like you have to start with a 1 degree shift. And if that 1 degree is not putting a substance in your body, then that's where we start, right? We don't put a substance in your body. You cruise on 4 hours of sleep because you're working through to a greater purpose, like you shared, Paulo, right? But that we get there, right? And that's why I go back to like that no matter what for me is like just not getting drunk or high, because there are several other things I'm going to go through.
And you can do anything when you are sober.
Yes.
Like we have proven it time and time again as sober people. Whether it's Kylon going back to school, you're going back to school, I'm going back to school.
Yes.
Like, but it's not just school. It's just whatever. If it, you know, I've seen other people become hairdressers at 50. I've seen other people become psychiatrists at, you know, later in life. I mean, it's just really phenomenal to watch, and I think that's part of the reasons why I choose to stay is because there are things that I have not experienced as a sober person where I'm going to need my tribe here for me. You know, I have 2 healthy parents, you know, but they're in their 80s. You know, I don't know what it's like to lose a parent in sobriety.
That's hard.
It's going to be hard.
That's the hardest thing I had to do in sobriety.
And I'm going to need people like you for those moments, you know? And, but I have to say, like, for me, when I can say, no matter what, like, if I don't pick up a drink or a drug, there is nothing I cannot do. I thought school was for people who were smart, Girl, school is a game. It really, for me, I find it like it's almost like a game of coupons.
And you're also smart.
And
I guess I'm also
a game of coupon. But
I'm a
as
little
addicts and
smart.
alcoholics, we underestimate ourselves. I didn't go back to
Yes.
school for
Yes.
years because I felt like I was too dumb. I remember having a conversation with Shaku, and I was like, "Girl, I have a 9th grade education. Like, I want to go to school." And he, Shaku is our medical
Love
provider,
Shaku.
no matter what. And he is a career academic. He's done it for years, and he sat me down and literally did every student loan paper that I had to do, every sort of FAFSA, like whatever. He walked me through it. And I never saw myself going to school.
Right.
And I graduate in 4 weeks.
Yeah.
With a bachelor's in behavioral
And
health.
and that's
Love
the reason
it.
why I'm going to school right there. Is that person in the corner.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely my number one cheerleader.
I love it. And I know that we probably have to wrap up soon,
Yeah.
but something that we talked about at dinner when we were in Chicago the last time, and something that I know that you're very passionate about, is harm reduction. So I do want to say, where's my camera? No matter what, recovery is an abstinence-based organization. However, abstinence does not work for everyone.
Yes.
And
Yes.
and so it's a controversial topic, but it's something that I consider life-saving.
Yes.
And so, as someone who works an abstinence-based program, how do you navigate harm reduction and working in harm reduction?
Oh, that's such a great question. Thank you, Paulo. It is that beginner's mind again. It is the recognition that what works for me. And I am not licensed. I can't prescribe for anyone else, but I can share with you what works for me. In addition to that, much like you said, I hold deeply the belief that a person doesn't have to be sober or abstinent for their life to have value and meaning. And so if their goal is to not experience harmful outcomes and still use, then as an individual who's committed to helping other people like survive and thrive, then the goal has to be, how do we do that? How do we address the harmful outcomes, right? Rather than the use, right? So how do we get there? And that could be any number of things. We talk about doing things in groups sober. Are there a group of folks that you feel safe with that you can do this type of activity with, so that you're not isolated and alone, right? Like, what are some other tools that we can add, right, in your toolbox and expand your toolbox? What are the options that we can offer, explore together, so that your life continues, right, and that you get to find meaning? And I stay committed to that because, again, like, it's not that you're sober that your life has value. Sober can add value to a life. Being sober can add value to a life. It's added a lot of value to mine, but that's not where my value originates. My value originates in being a human being.
Wow.
And so that's the piece that when I walk into sort of professional spaces, that I have to leave my personal, like, out of it. Like, and when I say personal, that's really the abstinence-based me, right? That I don't get to prescribe for someone else abstinence. But what I do get to do is support the menu of options, because abstinence is an option on the spectrum and the continuum of on the menu. And so that for me feels like the powerful thing. When people, even if they come into the rooms and they want to try out recovery and that's not working for them, or sobriety, that's not working for them, and they go back out there and then they come back.
Right.
Their life has no less meaning, right? Because they went out and came back, right? And so in that way, I feel really connected to that harm reduction as a tool. For me, as a person in recovery, it has to be a tool in addition to my abstinence base, but that isn't for everyone.
Right.
So how do we get people access to the tool, right, that can help them along their journey?
We were having a very interesting talk. I can't remember what you said when we were at dinner, but you were talking about just kind of your relationship with harm reduction and what you're learning about in school right now with it.
Yeah, I mean, well, and I work at a treatment center as well in Chicago. So, and it is 12-step based, but there's also a lot of people that won't necessarily work for. I mean, I think it's like what Kylon was saying, and I can really, kind of chime in. It's like what works for me, like my spiritual maintenance happens in the rooms of 12-step. But some people have a spiritual, like I have a partner who's in a different program that's Buddhist related, but it really is all about self-determination, right? And so these other forms that are just rooted in trying to make your life a little more manageable. Abstinence and the experience that I've had in CMA, I don't want to risk anything for my own sobriety. But there's a lot of people that this doesn't work for, that can see a beneficial aspect to living life with a little less chaos, and I'm drawing a blank on what we actually talked about.
It was all of us at dinner, and we were having just a very interesting conversation around it, because I think it was something that you were learning about in school at the time, and obviously Kylon was working in it, and we might have even been talking about it being one of the topics on a previous episode that we did, but I had a struggle with it, to be honest. I grew up in a 12-step mindset, and that's what worked for me. And the more that I'm learning about it in school, and I'm seeing it in the community, and I'm talking with people that actually, that work in it, and and working, starting to dabble a little bit in interventions and with families, it's like, it's just not for everyone. And it would be foolish of me to think that this is the only way. Yes. And so one of the guests that we had on previously said harm reduction is reducing harm. And it was really simple. And that's in saying that, whether it's, I'm the kind of addict, I can't just have one cookie.
That's right.
So what do I need to do? Do I need to buy packs of cookies that have, this is a stupid analogy, but the 90-calorie cookie packs, because if I get a Girl Scout box of cookies, I'm going to eat the whole thing. So if I buy the packets of cookies, it's a lighter consumption of cookies.
Right.
I'm doing cookie harm reduction.
Yeah, and that's the thing, right? We know that we can, and I know we have to wrap up soon, but we know that when we talk about harm reduction, it applies to so many things outside of just my substance use, right? It can be about my sugar intake. As someone who lives with diabetes, it can be about my sugar intake, right? How I get to navigate, manage, control that. It can be about, we've seen it applied in violence prevention, right? It can address like folks with episodes of violence, either receiving or perpetuating, right? So we know that we can use this as a tool to expand past just substance use and substance abuse. And so in that way, I feel strongly connected that we can apply it across the board.
We see it a lot in sex with HIV prevention, STI testing.
Absolutely.
Passing out condoms or,
And it's in our literature too. Yep. It's actually in the 12-step literature that this isn't going to work for everybody, but there are other paths that are going to be helpful, and we really can't ignore those other paths.
Yeah.
And I think I was also too, like very kind of a little bit judgmental of the harm reduction method or the approach. But the more that I learn about, the psychological and the physical impacts that addiction has, I'm all for it. There's one thing I wanted to give you guys. I kind of laid in a little surprise for Paulo and Anthony and the No Matter What community. My company Goldwell was actually kind enough to donate some shampoos and conditioners for your team. And
for your clients.
Yeah. So when you go to treatment, you can actually feel
they're running around with great hair at No Matter What Recovery Detox.
Well, gray hair that smells good.
Great hair or gray hair?
Great.
Yeah,
they're right.
That part. So I want to give you guys, this is from our company and from my salon, and there's just a couple sample products, full size, of course.
Yes.
For you and Tony to use at home.
Yes.
And so I really want to thank the Cow Salon family, Cow Professional Salon family.
Thank you
so much for the swag and for the donation. And I had such a great time here.
That's really fantastic.
Great conversation, and I knew it would be. I just love both of you so much.
We love you.
And we love you.
Love the two of you
Both
and
of
the
you.
Chicago Fellowship, and our hearts are always partially there too. So Thank you for all that you do in your own individual communities. And thanks for being here on the No Matter What Club podcast.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah.
This has been wonderful. Love you both.
Don't forget to subscribe, like, comment, do all the things, and we'll see you next time. Bye.
Bye. Such a good episode.